Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the longest shutdown in history keeps getting longer as the pain for average Americans keeps rising. This afternoon, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer went to the Senate floor to propose what he called a compromise, which is essentially adding a one-year extension of the Obamacare subsidies to a clean stopgap bill that would reopen the government. But an end to the shutdown does not appear imminent. Here's Senate Majority Leader John Thune earlier today.
We got to get the Democrats kind of back engaged. And all I know is that the pep rally they had at lunch yesterday evidently changed some minds. I thought we were on a track. We had given them everything they wanted or had asked for. And at some point I was going to say they have to take yes for an answer. And they were trending in that direction. And then yesterday everything kind of the wheels came off, so to speak. We'll see what happens over the course of the next couple of days, but I would expect that we're going to be here through the weekend.
The shutdown has now lasted 38 days. Consumer confidence is plummeting. The nation's air traffic system has been pushed to its limits, and lines at food banks are getting longer. Here are two federal workers at a Florida food bank sharing this message for lawmakers.
We show up to work hungry. We haven't eaten last night. We still show up to work. We still have to serve the public. We still have to help the people, because our job is not about us. It's about helping others. And that's what we're doing.
They need to come to an agreement to help us. We can't go another 2 weeks without getting paid. It's not going to cut it.
Moments ago, the USDA informed states that they will fully fund the SNAP food assistance program to comply with a court order while the administration appeals that decision. And this is all coming after this week's elections put the issue of affordability in focus. President Trump is trying to paint a rosy portrait of the economy and the cost of living while blaming his party's messaging for their election losses. Today, he repeatedly claimed that prices are low.
So gasoline's much less. Energy costs are less. When you have energy and when you have gasoline less, everything else follows. So we are the victors on affordability. If you look at affordability, which they campaigned on, they lied because they talked about, oh, prices are up. No, prices are down under the Trump administration, and they're down substantially. They said, oh, I don't want to talk about affordability. The reason I don't want to talk about affordability is because everybody knows that it's far less expensive under Trump than it was under Sleepy Joe Biden.
But that messaging is at odds with what members of his own administration are saying. Here's his National Economic Council Director, Kevin Hassett, just this morning.
We're doing a bottom-up and a top-down approach to address affordability. We're making a lot of progress in a lot of ways, but we understand why people are still a little bit frustrated because they lost so much ground under Joe Biden. I think that Secretary Bessent wisely said we're starting to see pockets of the economy that look like they might be in a recession.
The president's messaging is also at odds with the high costs many Americans are still experiencing. While inflation is significantly lower now than it was at its post-pandemic peak, costs broadly continue to go up. And contrary to the president's claims, the price at the pump is not below $2 a gallon. It's dropped just 3 cents compared to last year. That's according to AAA. The price of key grocery staples, including eggs and meat, has largely risen from a year ago, according to marketing research firm NIQ. And the cheaper Walmart Thanksgiving offer the president is touting as proof of falling prices is lower than last year's because it has fewer items and less fresh food. A fact the president ignored when questioned by our own NBC's Monica Alba. Take a look.
Since you brought up the Walmart Thanksgiving meal, and it is cheaper, but it also contains less, as affordability continues to be an issue, well, that's what Walmart says. I'm with NBC News, sir, representing the floor. But, sir, as affordability continues, why do you think there's such a disconnect between the economy that you're describing day to day and the way many Americans say they are feeling and their concerns about it?
Well, they feel better about our country right now, other than the shutdown, obviously, which is caused by the Democrats, could be ended by the Democrats in 2 minutes. They feel much better.
Joining me now from the White House is that intrepid reporter Monica Alba, and legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach is with me on set Capitol Hill senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor also joining us from the Capitol, where lawmakers are busy at work. Monica, let me start with you. Great job there questioning President Trump. And you really got to the heart of the matter, which is this issue of affordability. Voters clearly sent a message about it on Tuesday that this is still their top issue. Monica, what are your sources inside the administration telling you about the strategy moving forward? Is anyone telling the president we might have to shift our strategy on this issue?
It seems like that is now where the conversation is headed, Kristen. I did just speak with a senior White House official who conceded that overall the administration feels that maybe they could be doing a better job when it comes to some of the messaging of what they feel they have been successful on. And they believe that they have really tried to make this idea of affordability and improving cost of living and talking about that day to day a priority. Certainly you have the president pretty often talking about certain economic indicators or signs that he says he feels people should feel good about. But again, this issue of a disconnect between where the White House sees that and where many Americans who participated in Tuesday's elections, some of whom voted for the president a year ago, where they feel on this issue, there's still just a bit of a divide. So I'm told again by the White House that the president sometimes does feel like he doesn't get the credit he deserves on the economy, that he would like to see more of that, and that sometimes he does get a little bit frustrated. So perhaps, again, from a messaging perspective, this is something that we'll see the White House talk more about. You did see the president after Tuesday's elections devote a speech in large part to that issue of affordability, but he also has bristled at the idea that he's not talking about it enough. He's dismissed some questions on it, and he hasn't really spoken to these exact concerns that, again, millions of Americans are expressing, which is the numbers may be one thing, but the way I'm feeling and the way my pocketbook and my wallet feels is just different than maybe that reality the president is trying to point to. Kristen.
Well, Monica, the scenario you described is almost the exact scenario of Mr. Trump's predecessor, former President Biden. That was the situation in which he found himself, in which he was arguing, look, the numbers are telling one story, but Americans were saying, well, we don't feel great about the economy. Have administration officials, have your sources there acknowledge that there seems to be this parallel in messaging, because that is arguably one of the biggest factors that cost Vice President Harris, once she stepped into the race, the election, the economy, the inflation numbers that they were dealing with, and frankly, the way people felt about the economy overall.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because some of these lines you could almost remember hearing a year ago. It's true, from a completely different leader, from a completely different party in power in the White House. But this president and his top aides, really, when you ask them questions like that, they say that they have inherited the mess. That is how they like to frame it, of whatever the Joe Biden administration and Kamala Harris, when she was campaigning as a nominee, left for them. So they are constantly looking backward, which is, I think, one of maybe the ideas that they need to revisit here when you talk to officials. They are constantly pointing to the rear view and trying to put it in the context of what they say they were dealing with, when I think there are questions about maybe trying to propel that into a more forward-looking conversation about what they're going to do now about some of these concerns that they do admit are real and that they certainly want to validate. But this is a president who, as you know so well, Kristen, does often talk about his predecessors and tries to criticize them and kind of in the same breath bring that up as a reason not to take the blame for the current situation, even though he is the president and he is nearing the first full year during this second term in office.
Monica, stand by for us. We have more questions for you, but Gary, let me turn to you. Let's talk about what's happening with the SNAP payments. The USDA now saying it will, in fact, send out the full payments. A judge ordered the administration to do as much. The administration is appealing. Where does all of this stand?
Yeah, so this has changed several times over the past week. A judge had initially said pay the full SNAP benefits by this past Monday, or pay half the benefits by Wednesday, but figure out a way to get to full by the end of the week. The Trump administration did neither of those things. They said, okay, we'll give you 65%, but then that's it. That's all we're going to do on SNAP benefits. The judge then saying, by today, the Trump administration needs to pay the full benefits benefits to the people, the 40 million people that benefit from SNAP. The USDA now saying this afternoon they are doing that. But this is turning into a patchwork around the country, because you're seeing some states have already funded it themselves, and some states are using some of their own funding to do that. And so sure, SNAP funding is going towards the states, but some states are all set already.
So, Gary, what does this mean for the recipients of SNAP benefits? We heard one of the federal workers there at the top say that she went to work without eating the night before. I mean, that cannot be tolerated in this country.
No, it's horrible. And there's so many millions of people that rely on this. And it does take a while to get these benefits onto those EBT cards that people can then go to the grocery store and get. The state of New Jersey says it can be done as soon as tomorrow in terms of their situation. State of Massachusetts, same thing. But there's other states that are having different situations where perhaps they aren't able to fully fund it themselves. They do have to wait for the federal government to give them the money, and that could take some time.
Well, Monica, let me go back to you, because the administration, again, is appealing the decision by the court. Is there any concern either at the White House or amongst Republicans about the optics of this, particularly coming off of the election results, Monica?
Sure, because every day that this continues without a solution, to your point, it just becomes more and more complicated for the actual people who are relying on this food assistance. But the White House is arguing that they say they don't believe they have enough of a picture of how exactly they're supposed to fully fund it, even though now they are saying that they are going to do that, according to the Department of Agriculture, as you were just discussing. But the vice president went even a little bit further than that, saying that they shouldn't be told by a judge or a court how they're supposed to make this work in a piecemeal fashion. Here's how he put it when he was asked about this last night.
It's an absurd ruling because you have a federal judge effectively telling us what we have to do in the midst of a Democrat government shutdown, which what we'd like to do is for the Democrats to open up the government. But in the midst of a shutdown, we can't have a federal court telling the president how he has to triage the situation.
At the same time, Kristen, though, I am told by senior White House officials that they say they will comply with any kind of ruling and legal obligation that comes down from the court.
All right, Monica Alba, Gary Grumbach, thank you both for your fantastic reporting. We really appreciate it. Sahil, let me turn to you on Capitol Hill. I know you're gearing up for what could be a marathon weekend. Leader Thune saying he is prepared to work through the weekend if necessary. What is your level of expectation that they could, in fact, reach a deal? Is it looking likely at this hour, Sahil?
No, it's not looking likely at this hour, Kristen. The vibes here about possibly ending the shutdown and reopening the government have been up and down all week, and they are bad again. We just heard a new offer from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on the floor of the chamber that includes a few things: a minibus of bipartisan appropriations bills that have been agreed to by the parties, a stopgap short-term funding bill for the rest of government to reopen the government and end the shutdown. But here's the real contentious part: a one-year extension of expiring Affordable Care Act funds. This is something that Republicans are simply not willing to entertain in the context of this government shutdown. They say they won't even discuss it until after the government reopens. Schumer's idea was that just do a one-year extension, negotiate a long-term solution later by creating a bipartisan committee to do that. But Republicans are saying absolutely not to this idea. Take a look at what Senate Majority Leader John Thune, the South Dakota Republican, said about this idea. He said, everyone who follows this knows it's a non-starter. He said there is no way the Obamacare extension will be in this. He said that is the negotiation that Republicans are willing to engage in afterward. He says the proposal is unserious and unrealistic. Here's a little bit of what other Republican senators have been saying about this idea. Political terrorism, terrible and horrible. One Republican called it stupid. Another just called it nonsense. So it's suffice it to say, this idea is not going to become law in its current form.
Well, Sahil, let me ask you, because where did the idea come from? What's the strategy behind this proposal from Leader Schumer? Is he, to some extent, bowing to moderate Democrats who are effectively saying, OK, time to end this. We need to find an off-ramp. How do you read this proposal?
In part, yes, Kristen. This idea was thought up by Senator Gary Peters, the Michigan Democrat, I'm told by two sources with knowledge of the situation. Peters is notable because he's been part of a group of Democrats who have been negotiating with Republicans on a rank-and-file level to find a way out of the shutdown. He's seen by some Republicans as, a senator who could potentially break with Chuck Schumer and Democratic leadership and join Republicans to reopen the government. This shows that Peters and Schumer are fully aligned in their preference for the way forward. But it just underscores, Kristen, how difficult it's going to be to find any kind of solution whatsoever to extend these health care funds, even though premium hike notices are going out all over the country. Millions of Americans, about 22 million, are going to be subject to significant premium hikes. One thing that Democrats were hoping is that the electoral thumping that Republicans just suffered earlier this week would have been enough to move them on health care funds. That has not happened.
All right, Sahil, thank you so much. You and I will be talking throughout the weekend, that is for sure. Really appreciate your reporting. We want to turn now to the turmoil at U.S. airports, with hundreds of flights now canceled as the FAA begins to cut air traffic due to staffing concerns caused by the government shutdown. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy earlier today said the cuts are only going to get worse and placed the blame on Democrats. Take a listen.
It's going to be 4% today in regard to those 40 airports. And again, we're going to step ladder that up to get to 10% next week. I hope those who vote to keep the government shut down will come to an airport and they should introduce themselves to the travelers and ask them if it's worth it. Is their delay worth it? Is their cancellation worth it? And I think the resounding answer to that will be no.
Joining me now from Houston International Airport is NBC's Priscilla Thompson. Priscilla, thanks so much for being here. So you are at the Houston airport, one of the airports impacted by these cuts. What are you hearing from travelers? What are they telling you?
Well, Kristen, it is a lot of stress and anxiety for people who just weren't sure what they were going to be showing up to today. Now, I will say the good news here is that the TSA lines are moving, and a lot of the folks we've spoken to today say that their flights have been running on time. But we know that that is not the case across the country. At Washington Reagan Airport, not far from where you are, we're talking about a 4-hour ground delay there. There's about a 45-minute ground delay here. A lot of that related to these staffing shortages that we're seeing. And so it is people just showing up, hoping for the best. I want to play some of what I've been hearing from travelers. Have you experienced any delays, cancellations, anything?
No, I was nervous about it yesterday once I heard about the cancellations for today. So it was stressful, constant monitoring. So, but lucky enough, the flight is still here.
It was very hectic.
Very hectic. What do you mean?
There was not a lot of people working security, so the lines are very long. Shout out to TSA because it got me through faster. But my friend was flying with me too, and he didn't have TSA, and he almost missed his flight.
Now, obviously, right now, this reduction is set at 4%, but that number is going to tick up throughout the coming week until it ultimately reaches 10% on next Friday. And we also heard Secretary of Transportation Duffy saying that that number could reach as high as a 20% reduction. And obviously, that comes with the Thanksgiving holiday right around the corner.
All right, Priscilla Thompson, I know you're going to continue to track it throughout the weekend. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Coming up, politics, power, and peril. A top House Democrat from Maryland weighs in on the historic government shutdown and its sweeping ramifications as a debate over redistricting heats up in his state. Plus, brand new exclusive NBC News reporting on the Trump administration's plans to potentially purchase mega warehouses designed for Amazon to detain migrants. That story's ahead. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we've discussed throughout the hour, it's day 38 of the government shutdown with no apparent end in sight, even as the consequences for the American people grow increasingly disruptive. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman of Maryland, Glenn Ivey. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. I do want to start, of course, with this shutdown and this proposal unveiled by Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. It includes a clean CR and a one-year extension of the health care subsidies. Is that something that you would support?
Well, I guess the interesting thing we just heard from your reporting is that clearly the Senate Republicans do not. I mean, I was surprised at how forcefully they rejected the proposal. It was almost a hostile rejection. based on the quotes that I just heard. And of course, the House Republicans have been out of town now for 6 weeks. They're not even making an effort to come back and engage in good faith negotiations. So, I commend Senator Schumer for at least trying to figure out a path forward. But it looks like our Republican colleagues in the Senate and the House are having none of it.
Well, putting that aside, though, Congressman, I'm curious for what you would support. Would you support a one-year extension of the Obamacare subsidies to reopen the government?
I mean, maybe. I'd love to see the details, but you hate to get into hypotheticals when the people on the other side of the table for the House, they're not even showing up. So, I don't know that we're willing to negotiate with ourselves or against ourselves on the House Democratic side. They need to come back to town so we can get to work. And by the way, the health crisis we're trying to fix was created by the Republicans and the bills that they put through. The Trump administration's been totally recalcitrant on this, and even stooping to the level of trying to use hunger as a weapon against Democrats to pressure us into some kind of a deal with the SNAP benefits. So we'll see how it goes. But now that the Republicans have rejected this offer as well, I'm anxious to see if they're willing to come back with some kind of proposal that reflects any kind of bipartisan good faith effort.
Congressman, obviously Democrats had a very strong night on Tuesday. Does that add more urgency for you to reopen the government, or does it make you want to dig in on your position?
Well, I think it strengthens the position that we've taken, which is that affordability is a critical issue for Americans. They're totally dissatisfied with the Trump administration because not only did he not keep the promise to bring prices down, his tariffs and other steps have actually moved things in the wrong direction. Groceries are costing more, utilities cost more. Obviously, healthcare is going to go up. People are getting their premium notices that's saying their rates are going to double or triple in the very near future. So, the affordability agenda that the Democrats are trying to move forward with, I think was successful in New Jersey, was successful in Virginia and other jurisdictions across the country. We're going to keep moving forward with that. And I think eventually the Republicans are going to have to hear what the American people are saying them and try and take steps to address those concerns.
Congressman, what do you say to federal workers, some of them who are lining up outside of food banks, working without pay, and they feel like they're the ones bearing the brunt of this shutdown, and their message to Democrats and Republicans is reopen the government. We don't care what the details are, just end this suffering that their families are enduring.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm hearing something different from my constituents, and I've been hearing from them today as well as previously. And I don't just mean, buddies, when we're out, talking to each other casually. I mean, I go up to people and they're standing in line at the food pantries to get food because they got laid off or riffed several months ago or they're furloughed now. And they're saying to a person so far, stay strong. I've got very savvy people here in my district. They understand that this is a critical moment, I think, for the nation as far as making sure we get the Trump administration to start following the law and to stop violating court orders, for example, and to negotiate in good faith. Because they know that people need health care. They know millions of people have their health care at risk, and they understand the importance of making sure that something happens to address that.
And yet there are some federal workers who feel the opposite way, and we had some of them at the top of our program, who feel like they just want the government to reopen. One woman who we spoke to said she had to go to work today without eating last night. How can that be acceptable, Congressman, in the United States?
Of course it's not. We should be able to reopen the government, and I don't think that what the Democrats are requesting here is really too much to ask. In fact, I think it's totally reasonable. Trying to force the American people into choosing between reopening the government and having basic health care makes absolutely no sense. Same thing with eating. What the Trump administration tried to weaponize hunger in order to pressure us, Democrats, to try and accept the deal they're trying to force down the American people's throats. But that's not it's a false choice. We should be able to reopen the government, address the SNAP needs because they've got the money to cover that already, and the courts have already expressed that and that's why they've ordered them to move forward with the payments, and also to address the healthcare needs. The Schumer proposal, extended for a year while we try and work something out, and they just shut that down. I mean, doesn't make any sense. The House Republicans are absent without leave for six weeks now. Matter of fact, they've only been in session for 12 days since July 25th. And President Trump's been silent on this as well. I mean, he's got plenty of time to go to, Asia and add a $300 million ballroom. But taking a leadership position on this issue, he hasn't bothered with that. So I think it's important for us to try and address these issues so we can, make sure we're doing everything we can to help the American people. But the Republicans really need to step up. The my way or the highway thing really needs to stop. House Republicans need to come back to Capitol Hill and get to work. And I think if we sit down, we can resolve these things in good faith.
Congressman, let me ask you, we're almost out of time. You said you do support the mid-decade redistricting push in Maryland. The president of the Senate in Maryland, a Democrat, says it twists the rules for potential short-term gain while undermining trust in institutions and ultimately in democracy. Are you concerned that this tit-for-tat could undermine the democratic process?
Wow. I mean, it's interesting for Republicans to raise the concern about undermining the democratic process. The Trump administration has turned the Department of Justice into the Department of Revenge with these fake charges that they've been bringing against people that Donald Trump is mad at and has on an enemies list. He's been lying about the 2020 elections for, 5 years now? And whenever they lose an election, he says it was stolen. I mean, they've done thing after thing after thing. They've told lies across the board about what's happening with the electoral process. They really are in no position to cast the first stone about the undermining democratic institutions. And by the way, the only reason we got into this mid-decade issue was when Donald Trump picked up the phone, called the governor of Texas, and said, "I need 5 seats." That triggered all of this. So to my Republican colleagues who kind of say things like that, give me a break.
All right. Congressman Glenn Ivey, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We want to turn now to exclusive new reporting from NBC News and new developments in the Trump administration's mass deportation agenda. The government is now looking at purchasing warehouses like the ones designed for clients like Amazon and retrofitting them to serve as detention facilities for immigrants before they're deported. That is according to a Department of Homeland Security official, a White House official, and another person familiar with these plans. Joining me now is NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley with that exclusive report. Julia, this is an extraordinary finding. What more can you tell us about the plan?
Well, this is part of ICE's plans, and they're looking at this now. Nothing's been finalized on how they're going to spend the $45 billion they got for immigrant detention. And one of the avenues they're exploring is to buy warehouses. We're talking about Amazon so people get a sense of the scale here. Developers build these warehouses and they want companies like Amazon to come along and buy them. In this case, we understand a lot of these warehouses weren't purchased. And so now the federal government wants to come around and purchase them in order to house immigrants. I've been told they would be mega detention centers, and they want to position them in the south of the country in states like Texas or Louisiana, where they would be close to the airports that deport immigrants. Just for scale, the average Amazon warehouse is about 800,000 square feet. Right now, a typical ICE detention center like the one we see in Washington State is about a quarter of that size, and that's a big one. And so we're talking about being able to hold tens of thousands potentially in one area. And of course, there are some concerns about bringing them up to code, how they're going to retrofit them. They also say that these would be run and owned by ICE, not private contractors. It seems that ICE wants more control over how this operates. But of course, this is one plan that they're looking into. I'm told it is not in its infancy, but has not yet been finalized.
Well, I mean, to that point, Julia, you talk about how complicated it would be to retrofit one of these warehouses. What might the timeline be if and when there's an actual green light to move forward?
So, yes, I think they would have to make that acquisition. As we said, it is moving forward, but it's not been finalized. The thing they have going for them in this case, Kristen, is that they are buildings that already exist. One of the reasons why we saw so many tents going up is because it takes so long to build a brick and mortar facility that is ready to bring in immigrants for detention. In this case, they already have the bones of the structure. They then have to get it to a place where you can provide medical care, where you could provide school if there are families there. These are all things that have been required from court mandates of what you have to do to be able to detain immigrants, to have security staff. So, yes, that would definitely take months to get it up to that speed. But we've seen some of these places like Alligator Alcatraz or Guantanamo come online seemingly overnight.
Wow. All right. You always bring us your exclusive news.
Always have fun with you, Kristen.
Yes,
thank
you for being here. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, the big shift from Latino voters in this week's elections and why it's worrying some Republicans heading into the midterms. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Republicans' gains with Latino voters were critical to President Trump's victory last year. And one of the big questions heading into this week's elections was whether the Republican candidates would be able to hang on to that key constituency. And the answer was a pretty resounding no. Democrats' double-digit wins in the governor's races in both New Jersey and Virginia were boosted by high levels of support among Latino voters. In New Jersey, where Latino voters make up about 10% of the electorate, Democrat Mikey Sherrill won big in areas with a Hispanic majority, reversing many of President Trump's gains. And now some Republicans are sounding the alarm. Joining me now to discuss all of this is NBC News national politics reporter Bridget Bowman. Bridget, you have been tracking every twist and turn of this race before, during, and after. So tell us, where were the biggest gains in the Latino electorate?
That's right. So we saw, especially in New Jersey, this was obviously a big part of the question going into this race when it was looking really competitive. What were Latino voters going to do? And we really saw Democrats make gains among Latinos across the board, across the state in New Jersey. Take Passaic, for example, the city and the county by the same name, which got a lot of attention leading up to the election. President Trump actually won that city last year, and Sherrill flipped it. And we saw that again in place after place. I was actually with Jack Ciattarelli in Passaic and Patterson when he was campaigning in Hispanic-owned businesses, trying to win over this vote. Clearly just did not work here. And we know statewide, Sherrill won Latino voters by about 30 points, according to exit polls. Interestingly, she also actually won Latino women and Latino men. And while we don't have exit polls for New Jersey from 2024, we know nationally Latino men actually broke for President Trump last year. So it was really interesting shifts happening here.
Bridget, do we know why? Was it President Trump's policies on mass deportations?
That definitely seemed to be a factor. We know broadly, according to exit polling, around 4 in 10 Latino voters said their vote was to oppose President Trump. Around 6 in 10 said that they were dissatisfied or angry with the direction the country was going in. We did see, and I've heard from folks, talking to folks in the last couple of days from both parties, cost of living, affordability, a big issue for Latino voters as well as voters across the state. We did see a majority of Latino voters said that they think the Trump administration has gone too far when it comes to immigration enforcement. That was something we were hearing from voters as well and folks working on these campaigns. I talked to an advisor to the Sherrill campaign who was working on Latino outreach, and she told me that, voters in her view had buyer's remorse when it came to President Trump, that this was a big piece of it, seeing folks in their community affected by these deportations. I talked to Republican county chairman who told me a popular restaurant owner nearby was detained recently by ICE, and that was something that was in the conversation. So it does seem like this was a piece of it here, but affordability being a top issue for sure.
So big picture, Bridget, what are the key takeaways for Republicans who are going to be defending their turf in the House and the Senate? Democrats are going to do everything to try to win those chambers back heading into the midterms.
Yeah, that's right. Latinos are going to be really important in swing states, of course, and also in some of these really key battleground House districts. And me, along with our colleagues Julie Sirkin and Mel Zanona and Stephanie Perry, did hear from some Republicans who are sounding the alarm, calling this a wake-up call for their party, especially on immigration policy. And the county chairman that I mentioned, Jose Arango from Hudson County, in his view, he said Latino voters were sending a message here that they are not satisfied with affordability. They're not satisfied. In his view, the shutdown played a role here, and they're not satisfied dissatisfied with immigration policy. And he said, you know, it's up to elected officials to listen to that message. So we'll see if they do.
We will see. All right, Bridget Bowman, a lot to take away from Tuesday night. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristen.
Great to have you here. Well, between the election, the shutdown, and the economy, it has been a pivotal week in U.S. politics. The panel's next. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. After Tuesday's election night results, both Republicans and Democrats are looking to reset and retool their messaging with affordability top of mind for voters. And as the longest government shutdown in U.S. history drags on. Joining me now is the panel, Idris Calhoun, staff writer at The Atlantic, Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden, and Malik Abdul, Republican strategist. Thanks to all of you for being here on a busy Friday. We're heading into a busy weekend. Idris, let me start with you. Let's talk about this messaging on the economy. President Trump was elected in large part because he promised to bring prices down, because he said he would be the best person for the economy. Take a look at this poll, which shows how voters feel about his handling of the economy. 34% believe he lived up to his promises on the economy. 63% say he fell short, and it doesn't get much better from there in helping the middle class and inflation. From the perspective of the president and Republicans, do they need a strategy shift here?
I think you see that the president himself acknowledges that from his comments today. He expressed frustration about the fact that Democrats had found a winning message on affordability. And you saw also one of his deputy chief of staff say the same thing as well. So I think you're right. People are frustrated. The president was elected based on fighting inflation. But one of his signature policies is a massive tariff, which definitionally increases prices.
Malik, and yet the president seems quite frustrated by this overall discussion. He said, I don't want to hear about affordability. He's arguing prices are down. A lot of people are drawing parallels between President Trump and how former President Biden handled, when he was running for re-election, difficult questions that he was getting about the economy. And this disconnect between maybe you can look at some numbers which show the economy is improving, but if voters don't feel it, it doesn't matter.
I'm going to sound like a broken record because I often say that how people feel is how they actually vote, irrespective of what the larger macro numbers may be, how they feel. So they didn't feel, even though there were indicators to say that the economy was getting better under Joe Biden, they didn't feel it. And so the same thing now. And I think that the administration really early on dropped the ball in forgetting that that economic anxiety that elected Donald Trump in 2024, it still exists. And so they spent a lot of time focusing on things like DOGE cuts, you know, things around immigration and crime. And as you see, at least from the polling from Tuesday, those were not the top drivers for voters. They did not focus on the economy. And until they do that, they're going to continue to see this type of pushback.
Well, it's a fascinating analysis. Megan, I'm so curious for your take. You weren't in the Biden administration when he was running for re-election and before he dropped out, but you certainly were there for a good period of time. You were there talking about the economy, a part of the economic strategy. What do you make of what we're seeing right now as it relates to what President Trump is saying and as it relates to these results on Tuesday night?
For someone who is so obsessed with Joe Biden, he is making the mistake Joe Biden made in year 4, yet he is making it in the first 8 and 9 months of his administration. It is flabbergasting to me that he can't figure out the American people are not going to stand for "we don't believe your lying eyes" approach. And they do not feel that the economy is working for them. And there is actual proof that it's not. Groceries are more expensive. Healthcare is more expensive. The cost of housing. And so he is grossly misunderstanding the feeling of the electorate if he does not start addressing the economy.
Let's actually remind people of some of what we heard from former President Biden when he was his own handling of the economy.
Manufacturing is rebounding at the fastest rate in almost 40 years. The economy is growing at a solid clip. Wages keep going up. Inflation keeps coming down. Inflation has dropped from 9% to 3%, the lowest in the world, and tending lower. Inflation is coming down in the United States. The fact is, it's come down faster and lower than almost any other world's advanced economies.
Idris, based on your conversations with sources within the Trump administration, is there an understanding of this parallel, or is there a desire to just distance
I think they would dispute the parallel, and they would say that, you know, like Biden, though, that their plan is to bring back manufacturing through this immigration crackdown, through these tariffs. The problem with that strategy is that even if it does work, it'll take years before that stuff all comes online. And so they are hoping that kind of the long-term payoff is worth it. But in the short term, you will see this reaction. But there's also a risk that people, I think, overinterpret. You know, technically, it's very common that the incumbent president loses in the first year. I think part of that is also happening as well. But, you know, clearly Democrats are feeling a bit more energized than they have been. And they feel like they've shown a bit of life in the last week, which they've been lacking.
Well, OK, so let me follow up with you on that point, because the message was one of affordability, it seems, and President Trump himself saying that the shutdown essentially was one of the reasons why Republicans suffered these losses. They're going to be here through the weekend negotiating, Malik, trying to get an off-ramp to what is now the longest shutdown in U.S. history. The images we're seeing across the country are really devastating. The lines getting longer outside of food banks. Do you think Republicans are going to offer concessions at this point?
Well, it's a very difficult thing because or at least the latest what we're hearing from Schumer is that he isn't offering anything that they already haven't been talking about. So he wants an extension, a one-year extension of the ACA credits, but whether or not Republicans are willing to move the ball. But for me, the fact is, as I was coming over here, the driver told me that he has friends who drive for Uber who are getting hit right about now. Why? Because no federal government workers or contractors are going into the office. People are now beginning to feel this. So irrespective of how Republicans feel about it, the reality is that people are hurting, and that's what's going to matter.
Megan, to that point, there is so much pressure on Democrats and Republicans to reopen the government. And yet, in the wake of Tuesday night's results, it seems like Democrats are increasingly dug in. Leader Schumer did put what he called a compromise on the floor. He talked about the fact that it would extend ACA subsidies for a year. It would reopen the government effectively, fund the government for a year. Leader Thune says this is dead on arrival. What do you make of what we saw from Leader Schumer today? Is he blinking a little bit because he's getting pressure from moderates?
No, I think he's doing negotiating. He's putting something forward. He's also in a smart place. Republicans have to pay attention to him. Democrats swept places that they never thought they would sweep in Georgia and Mississippi on Tuesday night. So Republicans are sitting back thinking to themselves, what are we doing wrong? Well, people are seeing it now, and people overwhelmingly are blaming Republicans. But the big losers here are the American people. People are losing SNAP benefits. Their health care costs are going to increase. People are now not going to be able to fly effectively, and they're not going to get their Amazon shipments in 2 days because those cargo planes aren't going to fly. So this is going to affect everyone, and they are the big losers here. The government needs to get back to work.
Well, they're going to be here over the weekend. Idris, do you think that they will find can you look into your crystal ball for us? Will they be able to find a resolution, a compromise over the weekend, do you think?
Well, there are prediction markets that actually there are people who bet on whether or not this is going to happen. And they all think that it's going to last for at least another week, which I think makes sense. I think you saw, you know, what Thune said, and other Republicans are saying that Schumer's proposal is dead on arrival. So I don't think it's going to resolve this week. But I think the forcing mechanism might be if really 20% of air flights are canceled. And people's Amazon packages, God forbid, are delayed. I mean, that might be
larger demographic than just food stamps and ACA.
Yeah, absolutely. Really quickly before we go, Elise Stefanik announcing she's going to make a bid for governor. Will likely wrap the Democratic Party around Zoran Mamdani as something that we're going to see President Trump do, as well as we head into the midterms. What do you make of her announcement? What does it mean more broadly?
Well, I think it's huge, and I think it's significant from her, especially being a New Yorker. But I would caution Republicans about going after Mamdani because he won on this issue of affordability. So some of the same, triggers that Donald Trump won on, he was actually talking about these things. So I'm not convinced that the public itself will see him as the boogeyman that we normally would want him to be.
Megan, very quickly, does Mamdani's message resonate outside of New York?
I think the affordability message does. I think that his charisma and the way he campaigned does. I don't think necessarily his solutions to the politics policies are going to resonate outside of New York.
All right, guys, great conversation. Thank you
you.
so much, Idris, Megan, and Malik. Great conversation. Still to come, the groundbreaking career and historic legacy of Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. I'll talk to the reporter who literally wrote the book on one of the most powerful women in U.S. politics and how Pelosi changed the face of Congress. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we noted yesterday, we will soon mark the end of an historic era in American politics, with Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi announcing yesterday that she would not seek re-election next year. Her retirement ending a nearly 40-year career on Capitol Hill that saw the California Democrat become the first woman ever to lead a party in Congress, as well as become the first and only woman to be Speaker of the House. Republican President George W. Bush acknowledged her accomplishments during his 2007 State of the Union address.
Thank you very much. And tonight I have the high privilege and distinct honor of my own as the first president to begin the State of the Union message with these words: Madam Speaker.
Extraordinary moment of bipartisanship there. Pelosi was a key architect of the Affordable Care Act, which she helped pass in the House. She also pressed for impeachment proceedings against President Trump twice. Here's some of the president's response to Pelosi's retirement announcement.
I think she's an able woman. I'm glad she's retiring. I think she did the country a great service by retiring. I think she was a tremendous liability for the country. I thought she was an evil woman who did a poor job, who cost the country a lot in damages and in reputation. I thought she was terrible.
Joining me now is USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page, who literally wrote the book on Nancy Pelosi, Madam Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Lessons of Power. Susan, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
For this look back, well, extraordinary to look back at her career. What is her legacy?
She's been at the center of our biggest national debates for a quarter century. First Democrat, top-ranking Democrat to oppose the Iraq War, pushed through the Affordable Care Act. But she rescued George W. Bush, too. At the end of his term with the financial meltdown, she pushed through that bank bailout bill that was so controversial, big political costs for Democrats. But economists say it may have averted another Great Depression.
Well, we heard that sound from former President George W. Bush's State of the Union address. Then you heard President Trump respond to her retirement news. Susan, how have politics changed since she first took the gavel?
Yeah, and she helped change politics.
Yes.
You know, politics has changed in some ways in the fact that it's got women in positions of power, more people of color in the Congress and in positions of authority. That's a change. But it's also gotten less bipartisan. It's gotten fiercer. It's become very much money plays such a big role in politics. And that was a milieu in which she was very comfortable swimming. Huge fundraiser. That was one of her sources of power, although not her only one.
Well, and to your point, and to flesh that out, there are now more women who serve in Congress. And I think we have a graphic showing that when Speaker Pelosi first entered the House of Representatives, there were very few women. When she took the Speaker's gavel, 72 women. Today, 25. How much of that growth can be attributed to her?
Some of it. And just look at the elections on Tuesday night. The Abigail Spanberger elected governor in Virginia. Mikey Sherrill elected governor of New Jersey. Both of them recruited to run for House seats by Nancy Pelosi and her agents. She mentored them when they were serving in the House. She helped propel them to these bigger jobs as governorship. That is the legacy that is going to unfold for years and years, even after she's moved from Washington.
And Susan, you wrote that Speaker Emerita Pelosi actually considered retiring after the 2016 election, had Hillary Clinton won that year, but she didn't win. And Pelosi decided not to retire. Talk about that decision.
Yes, she told me that she assumed, like many of us did, that Hillary Clinton was going to win. The first woman would be inaugurated as president, and it would be a time for her to go. But Donald Trump kept her in town. And I think she's not one for expressing regrets, but I think if she has a regret, it's that she's leaving town. Donald Trump is still in power here.
Well, she was also just a master at the art of politics. She loved it. She relished it. As you say, she was responsible for huge historic pieces of legislation. Does the next generation of lawmakers understand how to maneuver politics in that same way? I guess we have to find out.
Well, in modern times, she's clearly the most effective legislative leader we've had. And if you look historically, she stands in the company of Lyndon Johnson and Sam Rayburn and the greatest legislators. You might like their policies or not, but in terms of being able to count votes and get things done, she stands in that kind of company.
Had one of the toughest jobs in the world, and she was a mom and a grandmother. What did she tell you about how she was able to do all of that at the same time?
She said it was the same job. She said the best training to be Speaker of the House was to have raised 5 children, where you have to get them to do things they don't want to do. You have to form alliances. The alliances will shift. So she said that was an asset that she waited. And remember this, she was 47 years old when she ran for the first time for office.
Well, it's just extraordinary. Susan Page, thank you so much for sharing all of your wonderful insights with us about Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. We really appreciate it. Well, if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News stations. I have exclusive interviews with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senator James Lankford, and a special Meet the Moment conversation with filmmaker and director John Chu of Wicked and Wicked for Good. You don't want to miss it. There's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.